There is a lot of tension in Albany right now. The budget is late, and if no deal is reached in the next 5 days, thousands of angry state employees will be forced to cut their hours and their pay. But that's just the tip of the iceberg for organized labor and the major group AFL-CIO. As we reported yesterday, the union is targeting individual lawmakers this election year, who the union says is not looking out for the interests of working men and women. The union has already zeroed in on downstate Democrats Craig Johnson and Jeff Klein, papering their districts with flyers outlining their so-called broken promises. And it's also prepared to go after other incumbents. I'm joined this evening by the president of the state's largest labor coalition, Denis Hughes. Thanks very much for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
So this is an unusual thing for you guys to do. You
Yes,
do not usually do mid-session action. It's
Right.
usually an election year thing. So why did you, or rather an election season thing.
Right.
So what made you decide that it was time to go nuclear?
Nuclear.
Yeah.
Well, the idea is that the genesis for this is a tremendous amount of anger, frustration on behalf of our affiliates. I mean, this is something that, we've been thinking about, talking about for 18 months, and recent events have sort of triggered a reaction, and that reaction is to reach out to the districts of these senators, both Democrat and Republican later on, and show our displeasure.
Huh. So what was the event that pushed you over the ledge? I mean, you say recent events.
Yeah,
what
recent
does that mean?
events is that, well, let's start. Layoffs, furloughs. We have 50% employment in the construction trades. We're losing people in the transit authority. We have cutbacks in just about every industry that we represent, every sector, particularly public employment. We've seen no relief, nothing that really even speaks to the plight of these dislocated workers, other than moves within the Senate to do things quickly, like the charter school bill and other things that went along. And charter school is significant not because of the issue. It's significant because of the way it was put through the Senate so quickly, and we've been working on a workers' unemployment insurance bill for 18 months. We've been working through IDAs for maybe 2 or 3 years. So when we saw that there are certain interests that can get these things through quickly, we realized that we have to say something to protect the people that we represent.
Okay, let's go back over some of this.
Right.
The U of T and NYSET, those would be the teachers' unions, are in fact under your umbrella.
Yes, they're about 25% of it, and the rest are half public, half private.
Okay, so how much of this is really about charter schools? Because it's certainly not lost on anyone, particularly the pro-charter movement, that Craig Johnson is very pro-charter and Jeff Klein has also been in favor of charter schools. I mean, I know that there are other people coming down the pike, and we'll get to that in a second, but how much of this was driven by the teachers' union?
Not any more than the other frustrations. I mean, the teachers' union is not really feeling or experiencing the type of unemployment at this point in time that my other members are. I mean, building trades guys are really hurting here. And the benefit is $400 a week. That's 10 years old, that benefit. That was half of the weekly wage 10 years ago. We haven't seen a raise in that benefit in all that period of time. We have had no relief at all on our economic development situation. I mean, the IDAs are still operating in ways that are not helping us, in our opinion, a bit. We don't seem to have the ear of these elected officials.
Okay, well, right. I mean, the Senate is obviously, it has a lot of problems and is very dysfunctional, but also there are people who would say, okay, I work in the private sector. The public sector has actually done quite well. And now, if you listen to the governor, there has been no attempt at negotiation. And he says, and not to pick sides, but he has said, I put this on the table, you said no. I put a wage freeze on the table, you said no. I put the pay lag on the table, you said no. I tried to get a budget deal through the legislature, they said no. So what else am I going to do? The state's running out of money. I have $250 million in my budget that is reliant on some kind of give back from the public employees.
Well, let's start by saying that obviously the people that are getting hurt here are working men and women, working New Yorkers, public sector, private sector. It doesn't matter what sector you're in, there's unemployment and hardship on both sides of this. When it comes to the governor, I would respectfully say that other governors have been in similar, if not as grave, financial situations, and they were able to negotiate it out. There was a certain amount of competence that's needed to get through these things, and the furlough is an easy thing to do. It is a very easy thing to do, especially when you hook it up with not shutting down the government. But that aside,
hold on. So you're saying if the governor was a more competent negotiator, he actually could have gotten a furlough deal?
He could have gotten some relief, or they could have come to an agreement. Because, you know, the public employees don't want to be furloughed. They want to work out a deal. They want to be able to negotiate this thing out. But let's get back to where we are here. Well, it's all about relief for working men and women, and we haven't seen any. If you look at all the legislation that's gone through the state Senate, the legislature, or signed by the governor in the last 18 months, none of it has been set up to relieve the hardship and the suffering of working men and women when it comes to their lack of employment and in this downturn.
Okay, so coming down the pike are, with those leaflets that we saw, similar efforts in the home districts of some other people. Jose
Yes.
Peralta, who is a Queens Democrat, but also, he just got in. He took Hiram Monstradt's seat. Also Brian Foley. Yes, Albertine, actually.
Albertine, you know, the thing about Albertine that's really interesting is the farm workers bill.
Right.
You know, I mean, they were, that was held up. That got, you know, the special treatment to run it through the Agricultural Committee instead of the Labor Committee, as it had in the past, you know. Things like that set a tone, and that tone is not really accepted, or we don't feel very comfortable about the tone that was set.
Okay, others on the list: Malcolm Smith, the Senate President, Eric Adams
Let's
from
put
Brooklyn.
it like this. Let's put it like this. There are a lot of people that are going to be on that list, and I think that the hard part would be to work out who's not on the list.
Okay, so including Republicans, you're saying
Yes,
now, which is
including
new.
Republicans
so
as well.
that's interesting because in the past, the AFL-CIO, not necessarily in the 08 cycle, but prior to that, had been allied with the Senate Republicans who were in the majority. Now it looks to me that, you know, it's every man for himself in terms of trying to get a functioning majority. Is it that you don't care if it's the Republicans or the Democrats? Are you trying to get one into the majority versus the other?
You know, from a practical point of view, for the labor movement generally, and for a strategic point of view, dealing with reapportionment and all these other things, a Democratic majority would be favorable. There's no doubt about that. The question is, what does that majority do to alleviate the problems that we have? I mean, that's why we're in this whole thing. We're in this thing because we need to get government to respond to the needs of working men and women. We're in a jam. I mean, it's lost on a lot of people that it isn't just public employees. You know, if you read the tabloids, it's always the public employees that cause this downturn. But it's average New Yorkers trying to balance their home budgets without any particular relief.
Right, okay. But before we get there, because there is true though that pensions for public employees are quite generous, which was
quite generous by the standards that are laid out again in the tabloids. If you look at historically what pensions were in this country over the last, I guess, 50 years, what happened here was the employers, generally the non-organized employers, moved away from the financial security aspects of employment. You know, years ago, or generally, it would be said that we put some of our money away. We'll collectively figure out a way to provide for our old age. And you have to remember that all defined benefit pensions started out by a defined contribution. In other words, you put money into it, you go the other way. This is more of an ideological shot, in my opinion, than it is a practical shot.
Okay, how much are you going to spend on this effort?
We don't have to spend much, which is the beauty of this. We have volunteers that are willing to go out, hand these things out, make themselves available for this type of thing. We have 2.5 million members, Liz.
Because a viewer wrote into me an interesting question, which is to say, why doesn't the union provide some kind of benefit to people who are out of work?
Well, where do we get the money for that type of benefit?
Well, you get money from your members who provide contributions for your political action, don't you?
Yes, and there is a lot of private sector unions have plans that they put money aside and they do these things.
Like for strikes, for example,
the strike
which
funds,
public employees can't
there's
do.
unemployment funds, there's what building trades call the topping out funds, there's lots of it. But from the AFL-CIO's point of view, our responsibility, we're a labor federation, is to actually